Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We are going to start today with our theme, which is one-person projects, looking at a band called the Ruins of Beverast. I have no idea what we're getting into here. Thumbnail doesn't have a logo or anything on it, so I can't even guess based off of that. We're just going to dive into it with the track Daemon and see what they're bringing to the table. The reverb on the strings and choir is like being in a cave. The rapping is an interesting choice over that. That wasn't rapping, was it? That was, it was spoken word, but it's like the volume was cutting in and out. They're putting a lot of space in this opening, really allowing the atmosphere to speak. And all that space is gone. And we got some black metal. .35 BPMs. .35 BPMs. With 16th notes on it in the guitar. That was the cha 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 cha. Some of the slowest 16th notes. I will say the production on this is pretty clear. There's some points there. Most of the production, we'll touch on that. Huh. That's two in a row for black metal that goes with that disrupted signal idea. Um, so this is black metal. I'm gonna try to be as nice as I can about this. Um, a lot of it is, it's based around simple melodic ideas with rigid rhythmic ideas. We're either always playing eighth notes or always playing 16th notes or always playing quarter notes. There isn't a lot of diversity in the rhythmic component here. There is an overall antagonistic vibe throughout a lot of this. It feels aggressive. It feels angry. And I'm not even just talking about the timbre of the instruments. I'm talking about the notes, the chords, the relationships that are being utilized here. It is a song that consistently feels dark and angry. The vocals certainly don't help with this. They lend it themselves more towards this gnarly component, just growling. Um, Definitely something inhuman, which is not something I always bring up when it comes to growls. But here I want to specifically highlight it for a specific reason, and that is the production. The drums are a bit flat, primarily accentuating the low end on everything except the cymbals. They get to EQ more on the high end, but I can hear everything. The toms, the bass, especially the snare, kind of lack the high end to really have a pronounced attack. Kind of have this dull thud. But aside from that, the production is clear. I can hear when each instrument is being played. I can hear the difference between their timbres as they're hit. The guitars, I can hear the notes. There is fuzz and distortion to them. It is a little bit more than you would hear in another style of metal, but I can still clearly hear the instruments. I can hear the notes being played. So that's all very clear production. I don't necessarily want to call it hi-fi black metal, but it's clear. We push that aside though, and we're left with three other instruments, or groups of instruments we could possibly call them. One is not a group, is our vocals. The other is our strings and our choir. Now all three of these instruments have something really interesting in common. They all have really wide reverb and or echo. All three of these sound like they're recorded in a cave. And so it makes me question things. If half of this diegetically, hypothetically, sounds like it's recorded in a cave, it gives me the impression of, like I said, something inhuman because of the growling. It feels like somebody doing something secret far away from society. That's what the vocals and the strings and the choir tell me. Why don't the guitars and drums have this? Now, I think the obvious answer, and the one that doesn't really require much digging into it, is that's just the production. The vocalist wanted an echo or a delay on the growls and non metal elements, but for the guitars and drums, it wouldn't have worked. I can roll with that, right? From a purely artistic thing, you don't need a purpose for your creative decisions. They just need to sound better or look better or whatever to you. And if this sounded better to them or her, to them, I don't know who this one person is. If this sounds better to their ears, that's all the reason they need, all the justification they need to do it. But for me as a listener, like I mentioned, the beginning of the song put me in the mind of a cave. The gnarly vocals didn't do anything to alleviate that. If anything, they leaned into it. It makes me feel like the drums and guitars are not in the cave with them. There's this weird divide. And so the narrative, the visuals I was getting in my head while listening to this were divided. It made half the song not feel like it was aligned with the other half. And I started to think, well, who's right? Not necessarily the right way to produce, but in the story, in this narrative, should I be paying more attention to the things that echo or the things that don't? And so I started really paying attention to this echo, and it became terrible. And I say that from, we're going to call this a critical lens. This is slightly subjective, but there's also going to be some objective elements I bring in here to support why I'm not a big fan of this. When the vocalist on the strings in the choir, it's not terrible. It just kind of is. I'm not really a fan of it. I didn't hate it. It just was. Like I said, it kind of made me feel like we were in a cave, and that's really cool set dressing. You know, you introduce a song, and it feels like we're in a really big, spacious area where sound can bounce around freely. I mean, it doesn't have to be a cave. It could be a very large empty building without acoustics designed for that. Like, you know, a cathedral or a theater would be a large empty space, but typically the architecture is going to be built for sound to travel naturally because you're going to be doing things in there with music, right? You want the proper acoustics. But like a cave or an empty house aren't necessarily built for acoustic, pleasurable acoustics. So you're just gonna kind of get this reverby echoiness inside of them. But when it came to the vocals, as long as they were only utilizing one or two syllables, it was fine. It sounded like an echo. The moment they went past that, if they ever sang or growled anything that took up more than a second or a second and a half, you began to overlap echoes on top of each other or on top of the source vocals, and it became impossible to hear what was happening because it was completely muddy. There's just nothing to it that had any indication of form to where you could understand the syllables. And the dude's growling. Like, I'm not going to sit up here and pretend that I could understand him originally, but I could at least hear individual grunts and growls and attacks. Once things began to overlap, it was just a wall of static, a wall of noise, a wall of compression. The echo did absolutely nothing positive if the vocalist decided to sing for more than a second. And that is not a great idea when in the latter half you decide there's more story you need to tell and not enough time to do it, and you start putting more words in lines. And so the latter half of this track ends up feeling just like a muddy mess. It doesn't help that I also started to pick up timing issues here, which, again, as I've said many times, typically give me a feeling of humanity. It evokes the natural imprecision of humans and how we're imperfect. And so I don't usually mind timing imperfections in music, especially black metal, doom metal, stuff that's kind of in this range right here, where perfection is not as necessary to tell your story. In fact, sometimes your story can be elevated through imperfections. But when we already have muddy production, that's making it difficult to listen to and frustrating to listen to, and then you also add in other elements that are making it difficult or frustrating to listen to, it compounds. And so the timing issues ended up feeling like another problem to me. And the back end of this track just felt like a series of poor decisions to my ears that made the song feel like a rough demo, a practice track, something that probably needed a little bit more time in the oven to fully cook. And that's, like I said, a little bit critical, a little bit subjective there. Um, I really didn't mind the first third of it, or it's black metal. It's not my cup of tea, but it wasn't anything super abrasive, and I could hear the guitars. I was, focusing on some of the harmonies they were utilizing and stuff. It's not a super deep track. We will talk about some of the cool things in a second that it does, but for the most part, like I mentioned earlier, it's a lot of rigid rhythms with standard note relationships. It's not really, it's not trying to break new ground here, is what I'm saying on those regards. So it was just listenable. And then, like I said, once I started to notice all the cracks, it started to feel less and less like a finished product to me. And that is going to be a biased take. Whether it's finished or obviously it is finished. The author released it. Um, although I don't, I'm going to assume that that's an album. Yeah, yeah. So this was released, and so I'm going to assume this is a finished product, but it doesn't feel like it to me. This would have been this. I mean, and maybe this did have multiple ears on it, but when it comes to these one man projects, and I know this from my own being a one man project, um, you need an editor, whether you're writing or composing music or making movies or whatever. You need somebody to tell you that's a terrible idea, or that's a good idea, but it's not really supported in your work, or it's taking up too much time, it's ruining the pacing. You need somebody to come in here and tell you, someone divorced from the project, if something's actually good or not. And that could be a situation that happened here where just nobody came in and said, the song kind of sounds like it falls apart there at the end. And then it would be up to whoever is doing Ruins of Beverast to say, yeah, that's my intention, I'd like to keep it, or, maybe you're right. And like I said, I don't have insight into the creative process. It's very possible that there were people who came on and gave him their opinion, and either they enjoyed what was happening or they didn't, and he said, well, that's my intention, so I'm going to keep it. But, I don't know. It definitely sounds like something where, at least to me, one more person might have helped to clean that up a little bit. We're going to get moving off of this, though, move on to something a little more positive. And it's the sheer variety here. This is black metal, but it is not black metal. There's a lot of stuff in here going on that keeps my ears interested as somebody who is not only just not a fan of it, but pretty much not someone who enjoys listening to black metal too often. But we kind of move into a doomier element. Um, we still have the 16th note picking, which is typical for black metal, but we're doing it at 35 beats per minute, which is just bonkers. What's really cool, though, is that that's also a quarter of the speed of our fastest one. So all of our tempo shifts aren't minor. Every single tempo shift we go on seems to be a factor of our largest one. So it's either a quarter of our fastest time or half of our largest time or anything like that. Which is really neat because instead of having like small shifts down or small shifts up, we end up having these large steps. And so we have a fast, a medium, and a slow component to the track, which is really neat. Um, and then despite the tempo change, we still utilize some of black metal's tendencies. I don't think we go into blast beats during any of the slow sections, but we do have a section that is primarily eighth notes, and we do have a section that's primarily 16th notes, which is black metal's typical speed. So that was really neat. And there was a nice bit of variety in the drum work as well. Not necessarily the lower end drums, but the cymbals had some nice dancey elements, and they were very bright and shone through. The production was just very clean on this. Um, well, I should say very clear. It was gritty, but it was clear. And that's what I look forward to. If you're going to give me black metal and you want me to enjoy it, like, I know some people just give me black metal to break down. They're like, I want to know what you hear out of this. And, like, it's just stuff that's not my cup of tea. But if you want me to at least enjoy myself a little, this is certainly the type of production I would be looking for. Just something where I can actually hear all the instruments. I think that's really neat. Um, I think that kind of breaks everything down. I talked about the themes, the general story I got out of this, just some inhuman thing in an empty room being angry, antagonistic. The song doesn't feel like it wants me to listen to it. It's I don't know. It's called Daemon. That's probably not helping any of my ideas that are popping in my head when I listen to this, but that's the general story I got. Somebody scheming far away from society, and they're kind of like this like inhuman, I think just kind of goes with the idea of demon, but anybody who's been kind of cast away from society, right? And the growling could just be a rejection of a societal norm, which would be typical spoken delivery. So anything that matters doesn't necessarily have to be a demon, just somebody who's off on their own scheming, um, divorced from society. And then we talked about the production and the variety. Yeah, I think that pretty much wraps this up. I'm gonna hit some lyrics and then we'll finish off the whole video here. So I forgot about this part. There's actually two sections in here that are in Latin. This might have been what I called initially the rapping part, but I think I eventually fell into the idea that it was just quickly turning on and off or fluctuating the volume, creating this wobbliness in it that sounded like we had a series of quick attacks, which is what kind of gave me that rapping vibe, but the attacks weren't phonetically. They were crafted artificially through volume manipulation. I have no idea what any of this Latin means. I don't even know if I don't know if the second bit of Latin was during this section. I'm like 90% sure the first bit of Latin was. It's the first bit of lyrics. After this, though, we move into English lyrics, and I have no idea what's going on. We have somebody preparing to attack God's creations with demons and demonesses and uh, doing experiments on humans' bodies and souls in order to make what they need to, I don't know, go up against God or something. Trying to craft power that would make God shake. Or tremble is the line. A lot of this is also written in Old English. It's kind of 50-50, but even the modern English 50 is still very flowery, still done so with a wide vocabulary. Um, for instance, I'll have his works surmount God's creations, consecrating heresy, hallucinating demons. And as your bodies tremble, sordid celestial bodies extol these lines and apprehend clandestine the art of the demon. So even right there, which is in modern English, it's still very flowery. Lots of really great words in there. But the rest of the album is, Hast thou received him so bewitched as a demoness? Upon earth there is not his like who is made without fear, who taketh the virile shape of the loins of the appetent. Like, it just out of nowhere moves into this Old English. So we have Old English, Modern English with a touch of thesaurus and Latin throughout here. And it's really interesting to read. Again, a lot of it kind of goes over my head. There's imagery in here I don't get. And then the Old English stuff, I'm only kind of like halfway picking up. Um, but I do get this idea of doing rituals or experiments, not sure if it's magical or technological, to craft a power, whatever that might be, to make God quake and tremble in fear. That seems to be what this is about. To create the hex of the demon, as the final line states. And a lot of this lines up with what I picked up. You know, somebody shunned from, or not even necessarily shunned, but just outside of society, um, scheming and being antagonistic. I didn't quite know what that was for. Apparently, they're being antagonistic towards the Christian God, and scheming towards him. So that's, like I said, it kind of lines up with my experience with the music. Um, and I'm going to say that the whole idea of the empty room, the cave kind of idea is just not necessarily something that was intended for the music. I don't get any of that out of the lyrics. It just seems to be a textural uh, element. It sounded good to put that echo on the choir and the echo on the vocals, so our person went ahead and did that. Sounded good to them, so they put it in there. Um, those are my thoughts on Ruins of Beverast's Daemon. This is where y'all come in. Let me know what you thought of this one, if there's anything that stood out to you, anything you want to add on to what I said, anything you want to correct me on. If you just want to tell me my views are wrong. I was a little, I had some harsh criticism on the production here. You're welcome to disagree with me. I'm not a musical authority. I'm just some dude on the internet who has a pretty good ear. Put that stuff down in the comment section. Above the comments is a description box, and there's a link for Linktree. Takes you here. You can find my music, a link to the Discord server, ways to support the channel, and so much more. You can go ahead and check all that out. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. We have a special selection coming up next. I'm hoping my voice doesn't give out by then. I can feel it wavering already. I think it's a short one though, so we'll be able to get through that in a decent time, I'd say. And that'll be it for today. I'll be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 p.m. UTC. As usual, until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.